right, everybody, welcome back to Drug Dealing. Today, we are doing something a little bit different. So, in the spirit of kind of demystifying how a biotech person thinks about healthcare and getting better care for themselves or their loved ones, we're going to kind of call this sort of a tools and tips sort of episode. And so today we're talking about clinical trials. So, Kenny, you want to kind of tee up why we're doing this, what prompted us to start this dive into clinical trials?
Of course. Thanks, Shivu. So, one of the things you and I both feel passionate about is that if you want optimal care for yourself or for your loved ones, you're just going to have to be more involved in the care. And one analogy I think of is if you were having a contractor work on your house, you would never just tell them, oh, do what you think is best and I'll see you on the other side. No, you have to be involved in what that subcontractor or contractor does to your home. And so, in the same way, doctors are experts in diseases and treatments, but you're the expert on your body, your values, and your risk tolerance. If you hand everything over to like a homeowner would to a contractor and just say, do whatever you think is best, and you don't look at the plans, you don't get involved, you shouldn't be surprised if the remodel does not fit your life. In the same way, Shivu, if you want optimal care, you have to help design the house, ask questions, set priorities, understand the options before you build, because this is medicine. Understand the risk to yourself. And so this is something I felt strongly about for many years. And after helping so many other loved ones and friends navigate the healthcare system and realize how difficult it is for people, I thought maybe some explainers on how you and I navigate this would be helpful. And you and I have kicked around the idea of real life examples so that it lands easier with people. And I think one thing came up over the last several weeks that could land with folks to help explain this. I was in the kitchen and in the background, there was this Apple TV show on called Shrinking. There's some big name actors in this: Harrison Ford, Jason Segel. I think Michael J. Fox actually makes a stop in it as well. And the episode was titled "Drugs Don't Work." And I didn't watch the show. I wasn't even paying attention. I was actually eating a snack, but I just heard it in the back as an ambient sound. And there's this character played by Harrison Ford, who's older and has Parkinson's disease. He's sitting across from his physician, who tells him, you're no longer responding to your medicines. It might be a time to look into alternate options. And the alternate options she gave him were managing his food, his diet, and physical therapy. You and I both know in a neurodegenerative disease like Parkinson's, those options aren't going to do anything for Harrison Ford's character. I wasn't even watching the show and I could feel my blood pressure rise. I was so irritated with that type of interaction. And he actually left and he was very dejected. You could see it. And he was trying to find a silver lining as he walked out, but you could see what he knew what that meant for him. And I immediately thought if Harrison Ford was a loved one of mine, I don't need to be in the room there with him, but I can absolutely help him derive better care. And so if we can play the clip, if we can splice it in, I would like people to be able to see that. But if not, that's essentially the gist of what brought this episode together today. And so what I thought would be good, Shivu, is if you and I'll share my screen. And one way to try to find what other options a patient could have if they've exhausted whatever standard of care they're on, Harrison Ford's character, if he's exhausted whatever he can take now, it may not be best to just run to food and physical therapy for a disease like that. You need to look and see, are there other options for me that maybe my doctor doesn't know about? So I thought one way to deal with it is we keep with the Harrison Ford story. This is a hypothetical patient. I believe that show is fiction. I don't know the series that well. I only saw that one small piece. And we take the hypothetical patient of a Parkinson's disease individual, and I'm going to go to ct.gov, clinicaltrials.gov. I'll put it on my screen, search for it, and show people how you and I might navigate alternate options or superior options for a patient whose doctor may not be as aware.
So right now we'll splice in the clip right here. This is all strictly for educational purposes. We should also preface none of this is medical advice. This is strictly how Kenny and I would look up, publicly available information about clinical trials to empower you as a patient to have, more substantive conversations with your doctors on your own behalf or on the behalf of a loved one. And so we'll splice in the clip here and then we'll get to the demonstration.
Okay, well, based on the initial results, I am concerned that your meds are starting to become less effective. Unfortunately, you're already at maximum dosage.
Got it.
But Hey, there are adjustments we can make with diet and physical therapy to start to
Yeah,
mitigate.
yeah. How long before the meds don't work at all, and I'm always a shaky mess.
It depends on the individual, but I'd guess 6 months to a year.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah, it does.
Do you want to talk about it?
Not even a little. Onward.
Thank you.
So now that we've teed up, we've seen hopefully the clip or explained the situation now, I'll move into free and available options for people to see what options they have. So I'm going to share my screen.
And while you're sharing the screen, I think, as biotech people, we get access to all these, very well curated databases and of drugs in development, of clinical trials. But you might be surprised to know that most of this stuff is just all available in the public domain. And clinicaltrials.gov, even for kind of how Kenny and I do our day-to-day jobs, is a really central source of data for, how we think about, all the innards of biotech strategy and drug development and all that. And so this source was actually created for patients to help them find clinical trials in their area. And so this is the exact same stuff that we use inside of a biotech company.
It's exactly right, Shivu. It's ironic that a lot of the sponsors, a lot of the biotechs and pharma that we've worked with have such expensive databases, but CT.gov is still what undergirds so much of our work. So
Exactly.
I will walk you through now, Shivu, how I would deal with this if Harrison Ford was a loved one of mine or I was in a similar situation as him. So I'm on clinicaltrials.gov. This is the website, and you can see it's a very simple interface. Scroll down a bit, and I'm going to look into Parkinson's disease. Just hit that and hit search. And I'm going a little slow so people can follow me. And here at the top, what you see is a very large amount of hits. So just short of 4,000 hits for Parkinson's disease. Now, we're trying to see if for Harrison Ford's character, are there alternate or additional treatment options he can investigate? Well, to try to simplify this, one way to do it is before a drug gets approved, it has to go through typically 3 phases of development in the clinic, so in human beings. I think one way to help simplify this for people today is to scroll on the left, and I'm gonna filter. We have these nice filter options from clinicaltrials.gov. I'm gonna go down, and I'm gonna filter it by phase 3. Why phase 3? Because they tend to be larger studies, and they tend to be the last study before a drug gets approved. The phase 4 you see below, it's a different type of study. Shiva and I can discuss that a little later, but it's basically a post-marketing commitment study many times, and they're not necessarily relevant for today. Phase 3 are the ones where we'll know if the drug can be approved, what the efficacy and the safety looks like beyond the phase 2, which is typically your proof of concept.
And
So,
and just one other added point of context, like for phase 4, those are typically drugs that are already commercially available.
yes.
And so remember, in the context of this issue in Harrison Ford's case, he has Parkinson's disease. His doctor has already exhausted all available treatment options. And so we need to start looking at things that are not yet approved, but might have a very high level of very high quality clinical evidence. Um, and that's kind of why we pick phase 3, right? It's been tested in more humans. There's a lot more data available for it, and that gives us higher confidence that the drug has a better chance of being safe and effective.
Yeah, exactly, Shiva. Thank you for explaining that. There are other filters we can get into, but for today, let's stick with phase 3 Parkinson's, a very simple 2 point search. I'm going to hit apply filters. And what you're going to see is a bunch of data, and it's strewn about in the 278 number that we saw. Now, to keep things simple, what I'm going to do is this, Shivu. It's another free option clinicaltrials.gov has. I'm going to hit download, and I'm just going to do it this CSV format, which is an Excel format. I'm going to go for all of them. I'll take this information that they share that they're willing to include in the download. We don't need to change this right now. I'm going to hit that download, and then as my screen continues to share, I'm going to go to this Excel file, and I'll make sure to drag it down here so that people can see that too. I assume by now you can see a very dense Excel screen. Is that right? Perfect. So you can see 278 is a lot. I don't expect even you and I would take us time to go through this. What I'm going to do is use the tools that we also have to accelerate going through this. I'm going to highlight all this information. I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to go to ChatGPT. So this is one of the common AI models that people know about. And I'm going to paste this in here, but I'm going to give ChatGPT just a prompt to help me filter through this. I'm going to say something along the lines of, this info is for a hypothetical Parkinson's patient that was told by his doctor their current medicines are no longer working. I'd like to show this patient that there are other clinical trials with various interventions. Here are all phase 3 studies. Can you help me determine which of these could be good experimental options for this patient? Now I just paste all that stuff in, and it'll take a second because there's so much information you'll see here. And I'm going to hit enter. And let's see how this search goes, because I do think it'll take chat a few moments to collate this information. And to give an idea on how much it is, I'm going to scroll on the screen here while it works. You see all this?
A lot of stuff. And so this is kind of the advantage of some of these AI models is that they have very large context windows now. So you can dump in a bunch of information. Obviously, too, if you're savvy enough to download the file, you can upload the file into the chat window as well.
And Shiva, I thought of a second question to ask after this, but I typed it up already, so people don't have to watch me type. I'll share that, but let's see how this output goes. I think it normally takes like a minute or two for these types of things. What AI is doing right now is it's scrubbing all this. It's scrubbing it for you. So you don't have to do that work. And you can see that it's looking at this one drug that starts with BEM right now. And it's going to go through all these things and hopefully give us an output that we can use. But let's see how it goes since we're doing this live.
And again, you can use your favorite LLM, whichever one you prefer. For this sort of thing, this use case, I think they're all pretty capable of doing this quite well. So it doesn't have to be ChatGPT. It could be Gemini. It can be, Perplexity. It can be Claude. One of the other ones, whichever one you prefer.
Mhm.
And I think this is a good example for us to go through. I mean, Parkinson's disease is not something that Kenny or I have a ton of work experience in. And so remember, the goal of this is to empower you as a patient to have more substantive conversations about emerging treatment options. In this case, for Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, it's funny, Shiva, as we wait for this to go through, and I know I can hit the answer now button and get a fast response, but a part of me just wants to let it finish and give us the best result since we're dealing with a hypothetical patient. I don't know much about Parkinson's. I've done the readings on some basic mechanisms. Obviously, there's been some interest with GLP-1s and their potential impact in neurodegeneration. So that's something that's been on the radar most recently over the last few years. But when this came up in that TV show with that character played by Harrison Ford, I realized you really don't actually need to know much about the disease, Shibu. You just need to know some of the basic processes to try to get some of these things done. So that's why I think in a lot of ways this is a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the magic of these LLMs is that it can help get you to a certain level of competency in a particular area in terms of asking the right questions very quickly, right? I think in a previous era, you would have had to look through all these clinical trials yourself, make a list of all the drugs that are listed, what the status of all those trials are, look them up yourselves and write them down on a piece of paper and bring it to your doctor. I think now with, the magic of these models, it can do a lot of that heavy legwork for you and put it in a language where you can understand it more easily.
Yes. So after about 3 minutes, it's given us an output. It's on the screen here. I won't read it all to you, but ChatGPT gives it its own options. Since this patient is not responding to their medicines, they're saying maybe there's some trials that can't help. Let's scroll down to where it started to provide some interesting answers. Most relevant to this Parkinson's patient, if the issue is, quote, wearing off time, common when the meds stop working. And what we see here is this drug candidate called CVN 424, which is an oral add on. It's in a trial that's currently recruiting, and it talks to you, it explains why this drug could fit this potential patient and who it tends to fit. And so these are sourced items that you can pull yourself and why it's a good option. There's a few other ones that it shares, and it also tells you about very common mechanisms in Parkinson's there. And then another one down here with a similar reason as to why it may or may not fit. And then it also talks a little bit about what the stages of the patient, if they want something that's disease modifying, and we can get into that as well. So if the medicines aren't working, depending on how far you've progressed as a patient, maybe there are other medicines that could work for you. And so we have this drug I can't even pronounce, an anti-alpha synuclein antibody, and then a few others here. And so this is I remember this one. This is a Biohaven drug. And so we see that there's a bunch of other options. This is very interesting, Shiva. This is actually a classic antihypertensive. This is an ARB. And so it's fascinating to see that they're doing other work in this. And it gives us some other ideas here. If the patient is moderate Parkinson's and willing to consider surgery, didn't even consider that one. So there's surgery options too. And I did see the language models pause on this one a lot. And then a few other things here. So if the patient's not working, complaint is dominated by a specific symptom cluster. There are some patients, many patients who get psychosis. So this is PDP, Parkinson's disease psychosis, and there's some drugs for that as well. So what we're seeing is I'm learning about Parkinson's, Shivu, as I go through this, that, oh, yes, there's a psychosis aspect too, not just the tremors. And so ChatGPT then does almost what this looks like a summary to me, a way to match these potential options with the hypothetical patient. So talking points on these things that we scrolled through together. And there's some guardrails, eligibility and things like that. If a patient's older, they may not be eligible for all this. So that's something you have to think about. So what we've done here is we've taken that Excel spreadsheet from ct.gov, and we've already got now a handful of things Harrison Ford's character could have engaged with his doctor or could do in a second call, in a follow-up call. And so now, Shivu, I want to add another question. Again, using free tools that are available to us. I have given, as you've seen, ChatGPT a certain output to do the work. But let's ask it to do a search outside of my work, because sometimes ct.gov may not have everything. So what I've pasted in here is a question I typed while it was working. Now, can you do a search, irrespective of the outputs I shared, for Parkinson's treatments for patients that have shown promise based on rigorous clinical data, and contextualize the safety for me so I can assess benefit risk myself? So this will now, ideally, what it would do is step outside of the output that I gave it, and this can give us hopefully a more comprehensive answer. And let's see how it generates a response. Shivu, is what I'm doing here with this two-step approach, the initial data dump and then a follow-up question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think it makes sense. I think too, at the end of this, maybe we can show folks like how to use this information to, make it kind of like more layperson language and like write an email to their doctor prompting the discussion about this. I mean, all of that is like very, very achievable now with the types of tools that we have at our disposal.
Yes. Well, I think, well, this is already done in less than a minute. So here we have the answer to my second question. What other options are there essentially that I didn't provide in the spreadsheet? And it's giving us a few other things here. We have this Vialev. These DOPA mechanisms seem very familiar as well. So maybe it's just another option of a tweaked MOA for patients. Again, we see this similar approach, but a different drug that could have benefit. And as it's still generating its answer, oh, I remember deep brain stimulation. DBS comes up in a lot of things. It looks like that could be something for Parkinson's. That's interesting. So, Shivu, what are we seeing? Just in the first three answers, we're already seeing different and additional responses, new data for a patient like Harrison Ford's character, in addition to what we found on ct.gov. We're now adding in another layer. And so let's keep going here. Here, this is a fascinating one. So we talked about GLP-1s. Here, we're under the category of promising next-gen options with potential signals that are not definitive. So we have GLP-1s. This is an old GLP-1, lixisenatide. We have, I think this one came up before. This is an anti-alpha synuclein. And then D1, D5. This one did not come up before. Well, cell therapy, Shivu, actually something that you know very well.
Yeah.
This was that one that came up. And then it discusses a little bit about risk. And so what I would say is some of this is duplicated, but some of it's not. And I guess the next step I would do is I would just copy and paste large sections of this into a Word document. And what we can do is use that to draft an email to your doctor, say, hey, you told me I'm not responding to the medicines I'm on today, and you wanted me to deal with diet and physical therapy. But what about all these other options for me? And then you can copy and paste that in, and that email itself would probably take less than 3 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, we can try doing that right now because I think that's a really sharp next step if you're in this situation. I think
Okay.
asking the model to say, "Hey, I this is great. I would like to draft an email to my physician to start a conversation about these various treatment options and and to see which one might be right for me. Can you draft an email that I can send to my physician about this?"
Did I capture your question right?
Yeah, perfect. Oftentimes too, for the audience as well. I mean, we're typing things out because this is a visual podcast, and you can. It's helpful to see the words and how we're prompting these models, but you can just talk to them too. I mean, if you have a microphone on your computer or your headphones, which everything does, you can kind of just click that microphone button and talk to it directly, and it'll translate your speech into the question that you're asking. And so this is great. So we asked it to write an email, and it wrote quite a nice email for us and left placeholders and to add specifics to your situation, which is great.
I like this idea. At first, shoot, the old professional in me was going to go to Word and type it up myself, but I thought, oh, of course, we're an AI. Let's just have it do that. And so, what it's done is it's summarizes quite nicely for us. Of course, you fill in the information that's relevant for you, but the aspects that are not are already pre-populated. Saves you considerable amount of time. And to Shiva's point, you can use this dictation tool to do it verbally. And you can also just call your doctor with this information and follow it up as well if you don't want to do the letter approach. But it's added some of these things in here. And I think this is an extremely effective way to take information that's publicly available, that's free, go to ct.gov, download the data, dump it into AI, and see what you can do to get better care for yourself. I'm going to stop
Yeah.
sharing, Shivu, unless you had anything else.
Yeah, one thing I was going to say was, so if I was this patient, or if I was this caregiver, I would copy that email in, send it to my doctor. Probably the next step I would do is I want to get ready for this next meeting that I'm having with my doctor, right? So the next thing I might ask the model to do is, like, give me, what are the three most important questions I need to ask the doctor about, given these drugs that I've already tried, or given my situation. You can add that additional context in there. Obviously, if you're an early stage patient, if you're a mid stage, late stage, all of that context is helpful. But basically, you want to ask it, what are the three most important questions I need to ask my doctor about these clinical trials based on my patient profile? We'll spit those questions right out in probably a few seconds. Yep, exactly. You can just print these questions out and have them ready when you talk to your doctor about it.
That's perfect. I love that. I love
And
adding
the
this in.
best thing is it gives you the exact words you can use. And if you don't like these words, you can say, "Hey, can you know, simplify the language for me, make it kind of sound more
Mhm.
layperson language," and it'll do that for you. If you're comfortable with this language, you can use that too. But this is a perfect tool. You just cut and paste that, print that out, bring it to your next meeting with your doctor, and now you have all the questions that you have the most important questions that you need to ask them about.
That's perfect. I'm glad we added that in here. So it's funny, not funny, but it's ironic how effective this is based on my current stage and symptom pattern. So technical terms, like you said, Shivu, you can ask it to simplify that. And it goes into some of those details. And as we go down here, what is the realistic improvement I could expect? And how would we measure whether it's working? That's a brilliant question.
Hmm.
How do we measure efficacy? And so this is something we think about all the time in our industry, but the patients have to live through it. So asking that up front is a great way to try to suss what's best for me. What are the biggest safety or long-term trade-offs? That's a great answer as well because every patient's different. And look at this. It goes into each of the It goes specifically into DBS, which is surgical risk, but others side effects as well. Bonus question. This is great. Let's see what AI
Yeah.
came up with. I'm at the point. Am I at the point where I should be evaluated at a movement disorder center for advanced therapy candidacy? This ensures you're not missing the optimal window for some of these options and you're not escalating too late. That's a great way to derive better care for yourself.
I think another overarching point too, obviously, like when you're speaking, we speak to doctors all the time. And I think even early on in our career, there was probably, there's a little intimidation when you're going in to speak to a doctor. Doctors are very important parts of our society, and you kind of it can feel intimidating to speak to someone like that. We've done it so many times that the sheen of intimidation, I think, is kind of gone. This is why we really like tools like this, because it tells you exactly what you can say to them. And, just another important point, like it's your health, and you need to work collaboratively with your physician to best navigate your health, and there's no stupid questions. So don't ever be afraid to ever think, what are they going to think if I ask this question or not? They ask any question you think is, if it's relevant to you, it should be relevant to them.
No, it's exactly right. And I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because Shiva, one way to think about this after we do all this work, it's going to be hard for the patient to traverse this new territory. We're used to it. But for someone who, if we're so fortunate, people learn from this, it'll be new territory for them to deal with their doctor. And their doctor may not expect this kind of response because these are uncommonly used as of today. So, one thing that could happen that I try to remind people to use as a filtering tool, if you ask your doctor a lot of questions, if you bring them a lot of information, I've even printed papers and I brought them into my doctor appointments, and your doctors lean back and don't seem to want to engage with you on the details, maybe that's not the right physician for you for this particular issue. Alternatively, if you have that physician who says, I know that study, I'm glad you asked. I didn't think about it for you, but let's get into the details. Maybe that's the right physician for you. So, a lot of this is not just to get better care for yourself immediately. Some of this is also to help you find the right people that work well with you, that work best for you. And these are filtering options that you have at your fingertips. I think all in, we've recorded so far less than 30 minutes. And in less than 30 minutes, the meat of what we were doing is probably only a handful of minutes where you can get a better engagement with your physician. And then if that's not the right one, find another who can. And then maybe when you find the next one, if you don't have the optimal one at the moment, you can use that information. The doctors that hear your level of depth and respond are the ones that probably want to work with you on that. So that's something to keep in mind as well, that once you increase your engagement for your own healthcare, some doctors will respond in a way that you need and some won't. And you need to use that as forks in the road to make your decisions.
Absolutely. And so, this is just one step in the journey. Coming after this, let's say your doctor thinks one of these trials is, or one of these drugs is a suitable candidate for your situation. The next step comes like, okay, what centers are actually recruiting for this study? Is there one near me? Is there one, where I, might need to travel a certain amount of distance that's inconvenient? Can I handle that? So all of that are kind of stemming from this first initial conversation, right? Clinical trials, remember, they're they're run through at treatment centers, and they're not everywhere, right? There's not going to necessarily be one in your backyard. Oftentimes, it's really large medical centers in big cities that have the largest trial capacity. But that's, second, the first step is figuring out, do any of these make sense for my situation? If so, where can I find these?
And Shiva, you had a great idea when we were preparing for today. What about PubMed? The
Mhm.
the Google search for medical research, basically. I think that could be another episode, but it's a great way to get deeper because I think there are going to be some people who see this that maybe haven't done it before, but maybe it feels like going downhill to them and they'll want to get a bit deeper. And I think maybe in the future episode or something we could do either next or in the short term, the near term is how to use PubMed and maybe the AI tools. I think you know some of them layer over that a bit better and you can do a more intelligent search to try to find. And so why are we even talking about PubMed? It's where some of the latest research goes. And so we've asked AI to do it. But you don't want to trust AI to do everything for you. You sometimes need to look at it from another angle. And as we've learned over time, the large language models, they're all a little different. So by using some of these other models to try to look into the more scientific ways of what else is going on, we can also learn new things as well that AI may not have picked up. One thing that's probably a challenge for a lot of these models is, are they going to find the latest information if it was press released in the market close as of this recording 55 minutes ago? If a press release dropped right at 1 p.m. Pacific, it may not have caught it. But if that information was already published, like an earlier version or something to that effect, an abstract maybe, some of these sites like PubMed and others may have it. And that just also further bolsters your armament to see what else is out.
Yeah. All of this is in the effort for advocating for your own care or the care of a loved one. You got to do your own research. And it's never been easier to do your own research and get smart on a topic than it is now because of the processing power that these models have. And so I think, yeah, that's a great idea. And in a future episode, we should take our audience through how to use PubMed and some of these AI research layers that are kind of built over PubMed that can make finding academic papers and summarizing data really, really simple for folks. And so, whether you want to get smart on a topic because you have the disease or you're, having a conversation with your doctor, all of those, there's so many tools available to empower you more as a patient or a caregiver.
Yeah. So, Shivu, just a brief summary of what we did today. Something that we care a lot about is empowering the patient, as you just said, to get better care for his or herself, for themselves. What we did was, in a popular streaming show, we saw a character who's going through a very intractable situation with their disease progression, an inexorable trend, unfortunately, with Parkinson's. It won't always be that way, but it is today. And their physician was telling him, "We don't have anything else for you." Long story short, he walked out, end of interaction. Now, if the series had other episodes that I haven't seen where he gets into advanced treatments or other options, that's great. But in that moment, I found that interaction, which I think happens all the time, maybe even several times a day in this country. How can we get better care for that patient? So we just took him to free resources, clinicaltrials.gov, did a search, showed a little bit how we might filter for things. We don't always have to cut off by phase 3, but for simplicity today, we did. We had a little less than 300 trials, took that spreadsheet, that output, put it into AI, and asked it to manipulate some of that data and help us figure out for that patient, for Harrison Ford's character, what can he do to get better care? And then from there, we added in a few extra thoughts. You had a great example of, I just want to write a letter to the doctor now. I don't want to wait for the next appointment. Let's send that in and let's have that help us write it too. So many options and all in just a handful of minutes for that patient to get better options.
Yeah, it's never been easier. So, we'll hopefully you all enjoyed this. Please, share this with folks outside, the biotech network as well. If you're a patient and you want to get smart on how you can be a more empowered patient, I think uh this is a great toolkit that you can apply to any disease, any situation, any conversation that you might have with a healthcare practitioner. And so please, get the word out on this. I think these are helpful tools that we use every single day in our jobs that help us out. And so we'll do more of this type of stuff, kind of demystifying tools, tips, tricks, but also, aspects of the healthcare system and drug industry that, maybe are not always framed up in the right way and, can kind of detangle some of the complexity in some of these systems. Anything you want to add, Kenny, before we close?
That's it for me. I think the next one could be, the more technical stuff on this. Let's do a continuation because it's fresh. But aside from that, I'm hopeful this will help others. And to your point, maybe it can be shared with others too if they need help.
Yeah, awesome. So we'll leave that here. Let us know if you like this sort of episode in the comments. Also, if there's other ways that you've used LLMs to enhance your conversations with physicians, either for yourself or for a loved one, throw those in the comments as well. With these LLMs, you get what you put into it. If you talk to it the right way, you get a lot more out of it than if you talk to it the wrong way. And so, yeah, if there's ways that you've used these that have better empowered your conversations with physicians, let us know and put those in the comments. Until next time, we'll see you next month. Kenny and Shivu out for Drug Dealing Pod.
Thanks, everyone.